Thursday, April 11th. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Finance to order, 7:30 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Top of the agenda today is to round out our budget discussion. We've got a few things that we need to cover as part of all this, and we'll march through those expeditiously. Jen, do you want to summarize kind of where we stand in terms of the list of those topics and just what you've got prepared for us here today?
In your 3-page handout that's paperclip, the top list is all of the changes that have been added into our budget so far. The one highlighted in gray we did not discuss yet. It's Jim circled back to it. I think he had alluded to it when he discussed P&D.
Okay.
But their land use software, they're not quite ready to decide where they want to move with that, and Kate's recommendation was to take out the $22,000 and put it in next year when they're ready. But that's all the changes that we've discussed.
Okay. And
then the bottom line impact to that is a $2.146 million decrease to the Board of Selectmen's budget, and it puts us at a mill rate of 16.53, which is a 2.8% increase over the current mill rate.
And just to summarize some of these changes, it's a revenue increase of about $90,000 of the reduction in expenditures of $2,056,000. The preponderance of those are projects that we've elected to bond, which include Highland Farms for $600,000, as well as the Henley roof replacement for $550,000. In addition, we've got the $567,000 or $69,000 in healthcare reductions that the Board of Education identified. This list includes that as well, and then there's a few other things. So as Jen said, the mill rate is down to about 2.8% increase over last year, which is where we are at the moment. So one of the areas that we need to discuss is the fund balance, and Jim has spent some time on that, and it's worth reviewing that and where it stands now, as well as versus where it is versus the policy we adopted last fall. Jim?
Okay. So, if you recall, if you guys all had like when we went through the general fund balance sort of policy, the idea was that we're going to, at least look for a minimum fund balance such that our unrestricted funds, right, not necessarily a gap figure, but the unrestricted or not committed to any special projects or anything, would be at least 12% of our actual of our revenues.
Budgeted revenues.
Budgeted revenues,
right,
which are basically the taxes that we collect, which doesn't include necessarily like revenues from building projects and so forth like that. So when we made that change, if you look at the beginning of fiscal year 2018, according to those metrics, we're at about 12.5%. We had a $18.5 million fund balance, and that was 12.5%, just above. Well, a number of things, including higher tax collections, money that was then subsequently returned to us from the Board of Education and other projects and so forth. At the beginning of July 1, 2018, at the beginning of this fiscal year, we rose to $22.5 million of funds. Budgeted tax revenues were about the same at $145 million, but that brought us up to 15.5% of revenues, which you can see right here. So if you look at today, if we were, tax revenues are going to go up by about $3 million, so it's bringing that percentage down from 15.4 to 15.1. And so I think the question would be, what are the risks to that fund balance that exist over the next 12 months? And then if we adjust for those risks, should we be using any portion of that to bring down the tax rate?
Right.
And roughly speaking, every $100,000 that we were to use from fund balance lowers the mill rate by about 0.01, which is about $10 to the average taxpayer. Not that that's the only way to look at it. So I looked at things that could happen during the next fiscal year that we don't know about. And when we looked at those, there were basically 5 different numbers that we came up with. The first was, there's a proposal floating around about the teachers' pensions, right? About our contribution, would be, just shy of $500,000 that we need to contribute. Now, we're likely not going to know that until, when the budget's passed, but that has to be done by the end of June.
But it appears it's, at least from the governor's proposal, out.
That they would not do it this fiscal
Correct.
year. Okay.
Well, what came out of the education committee had it out, right?
That's right.
And with the budget director's approval.
Yeah. But knowing that that's floating around in some form, that's about $500,000.
I think you can bank on it, but it's still a possibility.
Right.
Okay, so there's $500,000 there. And I think the other area that we looked at were the building projects. There were 3 fairly substantial building projects that have been kicking around that all are going to contribute a fair amount of revenues that, regardless of whether they happen this year, the upcoming fiscal year, or the fiscal year after, those aren't necessarily recurring revenues. So those which are estimated at about $750,000 in the next year, there could be a risk that 1 or 2 of those projects don't move forward. So just in terms of things that I was penciling in, right, we can't predict the future, but that could be another potential $500,000, hit to our, that we need to come up with. Other things, just kind of going in no particular order other than size, would be our ECS grant. Again, that's about $400,000 that we receive. That's determined by the state by a formula, and they generally have the ability to kind of rework that formula as they wish. So they could rework it such that certain towns in southwestern Connecticut don't get as much as they got last year. So that's a $400,000.
Were you speaking in code about southwestern Connecticut then?
Fairfield County.
Yep.
Um,
Yes.
And then Jen, because I left my printout at the office, the other 2 numbers that we came up with.
We talked about
The
excess
pay-
cost and the fact that the Board of Ed was a little bit more aggressive on their assumed
Correct.
reimbursement.
This year, they
percent.
used 73% as the reimbursement rate, which is higher than what we've assumed before, and, who knows what's going to happen. So I think if you were to pencil in the possibility that, all else being equal in terms of their expenditures, there could always be a $500,000 move to that if the reimbursement rate was to drop by, 10 to 15%. And then the last one, I think, was the highway grant.
Yes, Town Aid Road, which we budgeted $340,000.
Yeah. So I think when you look at all of those numbers,
Is that highway or LoSiP?
TAR,
Okay.
Town Aid Road,
How much was that?
340.
340?
yeah, so when you look at those numbers right there, you're about $2.25 million. Now, again, the probability of them all happening, I think, is very low. I think the probability of either one of them happening is realistic. So if you add up all of those numbers, which are like $2.25 million, that would bring our fund balance down closer to, around $20 million, which would bring the actual percent of our taxable revenues down to around 13.5%, which is still, again, above our 12% target. So, when I looked at it that way, I thought our fund balance was sufficient. So then the question is, is it too much? The other thing we thought about is, if the teacher pension contribution goes through this year, if we know that next year, obviously it's
a bigger number.
Nothing's
Well,
set in
that-
stone, but it could be double of what it
In
is
the
this year.
biennium budget that is proposed, if
Yes.
it did, I
If
think
it
it goes to
happened.
3 steps to 1.2.
Right, that's
Correct.
correct.
So it could be almost double
Yeah.
what it would be this year. And so then the question is, if there was a decision to use some fund balance today, is it wise to use it today when there's still a lot of unknowns? Does it make sense to, even though the fund balance is a little bit above our target, does it make sense to keep it? And to the extent more things came into play next year or the year after, we could use the fund balance then to sort of, minimize or levelize changes in the mill rate. Because keep in mind, from a mill rate perspective, all else being equal, for instance, if all 3 of those projects go through and we receive $750,000 of building permits, well, then that won't be coming the year after. So that's an extra, $750 that'll automatically be built into the tax bill. So I think going through that analysis, what I would offer up to the board is, we could probably consider a small contribution from fund balance, to offset what we tax residents. I think anything greater than 500,000,
Is pushing it.
would be pushing it. I think
Yeah.
something between 0 and 500. But again, just to sort of size that, a $500,000 increase is 0.05 in the tax bill, which,
So you would take the mill rate from 2.80%, I'm sorry, from 16.53 down to 16.49, up to
Correct.
48.
and I think, John, and just for the public, I think when you mentioned that the mill rate would be going up by 2.8%, I think it's important for everybody to know, this was this was a new assessment year, so all the homes were revalued.
Correct, yep.
And the grand list, even after accounting for growth, was down by 1.2%. So when we talk about actual tax dollars, that the current budget, before we change anything, actual taxes, tax bills that we're sending out are only going up by 1.5%.
Correct.
The mill rate is nominally going up because home values were brought down on average by
Right,
about
good
1%.
point. Yep,
John, may I comment?
please.
Great job, Jim. And, to say that I live for this would be hyperbole, but this is exactly what we should be.
Enjoyable hyperbole.
Well, but it's a terrific credit to you, Jim, for the walking us through that. But a little history, I think, would be helpful for the audience and the public. I would reflect that it has been relatively, I wouldn't say it was ever reckless, but certainly arbitrary, the way in which we toggled with the fund balance to finish the budget. And that we have some guidance because we reflected on it during the interim this year before the budget season and came up with a policy, and we have guidance around it, and we can right size it, and then with these variables as you've enumerated, we can make a decision that's logical, and it is not in fact overdoing something that has an effect in the future is really a great process. Let me just, a little background. I don't have the numbers, but that number has largely been drawn down. And the question was how far are we going to take it? That number would be going down, down, down. Where would it go? Where would it end up? And it was an issue that was raised. I don't think it was ever an issue that was a serious concern. But at some point, the rating agencies would reflect on that as a variable that was suspicious and maybe one that was being used to, manage the budget to some constant effect, but on the backs of the taxpayers, essentially. So I think we have, the analysis you just did, Jim, is just terrific. I also think it's conservative. I think we could do the $500,000 and not be concerned. So I want to endorse what you just said, but it was the process that we walked through to get here that I think has real logic to it.
And then I think when you look at our $22 million balance, we're looking at that as a percentage of budgeted revenues, basically what we're taxing. But, there's another $8.5 million or so of, $8.7 million of other revenues, right? Beach stickers,
Program
building
fees and
permits,
all
all
of that.
things that are sort of uncontrollable. We know that we have a 99.9% tax collection rate. So I think when you think about the cash that we hold on, that we hold in the general fund as a percentage of sort of non-tax revenues, that will continue to go down naturally because we're going to lose like $750,000 worth of building permits next year and so forth. So I think, the rating agencies sort of look at our reserves as a portion of budgeted revenues. We should always think about it as the real revenues we don't have control over are the discretionary ones.
Right.
I like your conclusion, but I think your point about the mill rate in part being a function of the grand list going down, I think that's kind of a way to look at it for the existing residents, but new people coming into town are going to focus on the mill rate against the actual value. So it's important to kind
Yeah,
of keep that
fair.
in mind.
I guess I'll, go ahead.
Well, just keep in mind the assessed value is always the 70% of the actual.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still, it's,
And then one thing I would just say is that not everybody's home went down by 1.5%.
No.
So when you think about sort of how things performed, and I think that the tax assessor had sent around some information, if you look at where the changes are occurring, there was greater decreases at the high end, which means the overall tax burden, that 148 gets pushed more towards
Yeah, no,
slightly lower homes.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I guess my comment on this, what you say about fund balance and making sure we've got a level of prudence in there that maybe is above the 12% floor that we've set for this, given some of those uncertainties, is not a bad idea. We still have a lot more fund balance than even that would suggest in terms of prudence. And so making an adjustment now to take it down a bit seems to make sense. I'd also say that because if you don't do that, what you've essentially done is you've shifted the tax burden for maintaining this fund balance, which if you go back to the state of the town address that we went through, that does bleed off over time. And at some point, when you get down to that 12% floor, you're going to have to raise taxes to bring the fund balance to where it needs to be. So we don't want to get too aggressive about this to accelerate the date where that tax increase needs to take place. I get that. But at the same time, we're looking at a budget this year that has the increase that you just mentioned versus a flat budget last year. And so I would be okay with actually taking $500,000 out of fund balance. Jennifer, you and I talked a little bit about the mechanism for doing that. In addition to the history that you specified, one of the things that we did before was that a draw on fund balance was actually permanently built into the budget process. And we did that, but then we underestimated the collection rate, and it was just this sort of odd combination of having that. So stripping out the fund balance deduction, resetting that collection rate, and then saying if we want to make a change in fund balance, let's be explicit about it as opposed to just throwing a number onto the budget sheet. So we made that change a couple of years ago, and I think that's a lot better. So in terms of if we're going to make use of this $500,000, can you talk a little bit about what we discussed earlier today?
Right, my recommendation would be that we identify specific capital projects that we would remove from the budget so we're not taxing for them and fund them through a special appropriation from fund balance. So it has the same effect on the bottom line of the budget, the same effect on the mill rate, but it's not creating that structural imbalance by just throwing contribution from fund balance into the world of revenues on the budget. And it's also consistent with the policy of drawing down for specific one-time uses.
Absolutely. So I'd be in favor of that approach, and I think we've got certainly the projects in there that we could fund with a contribution from fund balance. So I guess one question would be is if we want to actually add up some specific problem or projects, so it might not actually be exactly $500,000. So we ought to just pick some off this list, if that's something you want to even take a look at right now, that we could get to something that would work.
Right, I took a look at our list of capital projects for the town and the Board of Education. What I was looking at, I didn't want to do anything that we fund on a recurring basis because we don't want to see funding, no funding in the budget and return that. So none of the ones that we reserved for. I was looking for ones that were higher dollar amount just because it's a little easier than a lengthy list. And I was looking for ones that perhaps if we had a special appropriation that became effective before July 1st, departments might want to hit the ground running on them.
Great.
So the ones that I did identify were, and I was also looking for ones that wouldn't be controversial, because if they are controversial, we want to give the RTM the ability to reduce the budget if they feel strongly that they shouldn't.
I'm sorry, these would be projects we would have approved anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the ones that I came up with were new sidewalk installation for $200,000, because when the weather's nice, that's something that DPW could get going on even without waiting for a 7-1 appropriation. So that was $200,000. The Norotan and Ledge intersection design for $175. I think as soon as we can get an appropriation in for that, that is to our benefit. And the short lane construction at $50,000, I thought would be a good candidate. So that gets us,
425?
yeah.
What do you have?
In the $75,000 range, we have Town Hall Gymnasium upgrades, which was replacement of windows, and Board of Ed is replacing a rooftop unit with a gas-fired HVAC unit for $75,000.
Both of those are 75?
Yes.
So if we pick one of them, that would give us 500.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fine with either one, but
Yeah.
the sum of those projects would get us to exactly $500,000? Okay.
Were both those projects like intended, like the Board of Ed wanted to start like July this summer?
Yeah, is either one of them, is it convenient
was
to
it-
start now?
I didn't have those conversations. Ed is out of town, and this just came up, so I didn't have a chance to speak with Mike Lynch. So I don't know if either of those are a hit the ground running type of thing.
Okay.
You don't have the schedule in front of us?
Yeah, I might actually just vote to put the Board of Ed project in there simply because if they're going to do something, it just gives them the option to get started right, so that takes us to 500. So what that would essentially do is cut another $500,000 from this budget, and then we would just replace the funding for this out of the budget to be done through fund balance, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So can we make that appropriation by ourselves from the fund balance? So that's
No,
that's
no. Well,
So you could take action tonight to, we won't have a write-up for you like we normally do, but you could approve a special appropriation from fund balance to fund these specific projects. And then I could do the write-up and send it through Board of Selectmen, and we can get it on RTM to coincide with their budget vote, so that these all move through at the same
But
time.
that would be, would that then turn into a fiscal year 2019 expenditure?
Yes.
but we take it out of the 2020 budget, so, okay. Does anyone have any comments? I know, Mrs. Stevenson, you're here. If we do this, this would go to your board for consideration. Is this something you would want to weigh in at this time, or?
It's a great idea.
Okay, okay. Short and simple.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on fund balance, or anything else you've looked at that you wanted to?
I guess the only comment I would make is that, we're at like 15.5% right now, and our guideline is 12. Like when the rating agencies reviewed us 4 or 5 weeks ago for the bond issue, they're constantly making comments about the amount that we have in the fund balance. So although we think it's plenty, and the supermajority of all our tax revenues come from, taxes, it's always something that they're looking and following very closely. And, I think in their mind, in their eyes, 15.5%, they always want more.
Okay.
So,
And Jim, did we ask this when they were, when we did the bonding, there's 11 towns, I believe, or 11 jurisdictions in Connecticut that have AAA ratings. And I don't know if we talked about this last time. Did we do a comparison of us versus the other 11 in terms of fund balance? So for the rating agencies to say to us, you have a little bit too much money, or you have not enough money, how does that stack up to the other 10?
In general, they think that Connecticut AAAs have lower fund balance levels than the national average for AAAs. In their credit opinion on us, they said our finances were narrow relative to the others in our ratings category. So I think when we did our fund balance policy, we compared pretty favorably
We
to
did.
the others.
I only-
But nationwide, we don't.
No, and that's exactly correct, but I certainly I don't think there's anything untoward happening here whatsoever. I'd be careful to let the discussion go there. It was an analysis that we looked at when we did the fund balance review that I thought put us in a nice spot. I'm not sure it was exactly the AAAs, but it was a peer group. We did that analysis.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is we're about to layer in a lot of debt for the Oxford School. It's not all at once, but over the next 3 years, we're going to borrow some significant amount of money. And so it's important that as we think through all this, we don't want any of this to touch that credit rating in the run-up to that accumulation of debt. In my judgment, this does not do that. Our fund balance percentage remains significantly in excess of what our policy is and is consistent with everything I've read from ratings agency guidance.
Yeah, and there's another aspect of it, which is, and I don't think they're interdependent, but they are two different variables that any prudent reviewer would look at. But remember that our total outstanding bonded indebtedness has really come down significantly. I'm going to say in the order of 102 to 60-ish.
Yep.
So, when you consider those two things together, there's not something here that looks in any way mischievous or profligate. So I think we're in good shape, and I think we're doing, as I said, Jim, we're doing exactly what I think we were trying to do when we came up with a policy. We're adhering to it.
Okay. So I think where we end up on that is still at the right level of prudence. We still have a healthy fund balance. We've provided a modicum of taxpayer relief as part of this process, and I think we're in a good spot. Any other further comments on fund balance? Okay. I did want to briefly address what we covered last week, which was a discussion of the treasurer's budget and specifically the interest income that she has budgeted as part of that budget. So where I think we've come out on that is I don't want to recommend any changes to the budget that she has proposed. What I think we need to do is engage in a longer conversation and collaboration with the treasurer's office on a couple of things. One of those is the policy that she uses for making investment and cash management decisions. By her own admission, that policy is due for a reassessment and a reevaluation, and though it remains something that's the exclusive purview of her office, she actually invites people coming to the table to help her think about that, with the idea being that a collective view, particularly members of this board and maybe others, joining her to help think through that, will result in a really significant improvement to what she has currently. In addition, we could sit down and go through the math and the approach to determining what an appropriate budget is for that interest income. There's controversy this time around about whether that budget's understated. I think, frankly, taking some money out of fund balance maybe takes a bit of pressure off trying to make a decision that we need to reduce that interest income budget. But, as part of this summer process that we would engage with her, we could actually talk about the approach for how she does that budgeting and see if we can come up with some constructive suggestions for that. So I don't see any reason to address a change in that budget or any aspect of her policy as part of the discussions for this fiscal year, but we ought to take this up as soon as the budget process is concluded, help her with that, and help get to a collective answer that makes a lot of sense for everybody. So if that's okay, that's what I'd like to do there. In terms of other topics that we need to cover before we get to sort of a final budget that we can vote on, does anybody have anything else that they want to add? Paul, Jim, anything else? You guys, anything? Okay. Jennifer probably still has to do some math while we're thinking about this. What we have here are budget resolutions that we can vote on tonight that, based on the final changes she makes there, we can read those or put those resolutions into the record and then vote them into effect.
Can I ask one question? One of
Please.
the things we're going to do is vote later on the police contract.
Yes.
Does that affect the budget in any kind?
Not significantly. The biggest item would be their wage increases, and we did put a significant amount into the employee set-aside contingency account in anticipation of settlement of the contracts. So for both police union and town hall union, because they both recently settled, we'll do a transfer at the beginning of the year to move money out of that employee set-aside and into the departments.
Okay.
But your sense is what's budgeted for that is going to cover
Right.
that contract. Okay. All right. So I think we've discussed everything we need to discuss to get to a final mill rate to go into these resolutions. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or anything else they'd like to add before we finish this up? Okay. So are you ready for with a resolution, a set of numbers that we can use?
In just one moment. Who has that down, John? So the new numbers are written on there.
Okay, terrific. We have had a reading of this in the past, to read this into the record. Is anyone, do we need to do that again this year? I know
I just wanted to check.
I would make a
the
motion
numbers.
just because it's entertaining.
it's entertaining. Okay.
What I would like is to, where does that number come from?
From Jennifer.
No,
That is the total of our capital projects. So if you look
okay,
on the Volpe report.
You've answered the question.
Okay,
Yep.
I'd done that, and I thought that was probably the answer.
yeah,
but-
before we net out the revenues.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I will quickly read this resolution, as I guess I do every year. It's kind of like pardoning a turkey or something like that. Resolved that an appropriation of $3,717,111 is hereby made from the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien as shown by the budget this day approved. B, resolved that an appropriation of $47,740,688 is hereby made in the general fund for the selectmen's operating budget. C, resolved that an appropriation of $100,118,409 is hereby made in the general fund for the education operating budget. D, resolved that the above appropriation totaling $147,859,097 are for the purpose of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020 as shown by the budget this day approved. E, resolved that a tax of 16.47 mils is hereby levied upon the last complete grand list of the town with a total net assessment of $8,473,454,179 on property as of October 1st, 2018, payable in 2 equal semi-annual installments, from the first installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2019, and the second installment to become due and payable on January 1st, 2020, provided, however, that 1, any taxpayer may pay both of said installments on July 1st, 2019, 2, the personal property tax on motor vehicles in said town shall become due and payable in 1 single installment on July 1st, 2019, and 3, any property tax in any amount not in excess of $100 shall become due and payable in 1 single installment on July 1st, 2019. F, resolved that the town of Darien, acting through its Board of Selectmen and subject to the approval of said town at the annual budget meeting of the representative town meeting to be held May 13th, 2019, be authorized to borrow on the note or notes of the town the sum of $5 million, or so much thereof, as may be necessary for the general expenses of the town pending the collection of either or both of said semi-annual installments of taxes on or prior to June 30th, 2020. G, resolved that the following appropriations for other funds are hereby made as detailed below for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, as shown by the budget this day approved. $4,029,645 sewer operating fund for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien Sewer Commission, $550,000 for the sewer assessment fund, $117,600 for the sewer capital fund, $1,593,100 for the parking lot administration fund, and $899,529 for the parking lot capital fund. Can I have someone to move that resolution, please? Rob, second. Paul, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We have a budget resolution passed and approved. That wraps up our discussion of the budget. We're going to move on to refunding resolution, which we typically have. I don't know if everyone wants to stay for that, but this part of the budget discussion for this part of the meeting is finished. Okay, next is the refunding resolution. This is a resolution that we adopt every year to set a dollar amount that allows us to refund expeditiously, should we need to do that, to take advantage of a market condition with interest rates. We've done this every year. I don't know if it's always been 30 million. I think we've had higher
think it
numbers
was
in the past,
60
million
million
before. This is just a reflection of the fact that we have, thank you, appreciate it, friends. This is a reflection of the fact that we just have less debt
Right.
outstanding that might be a candidate for refund.
And also, we can no longer do advance refunds.
Okay, there you go, too. So, so this year's refunding resolution is for $30 million. And again, that gives us the ability to move quickly on a refunding opportunities. Anybody have any questions about that? This is a resolution we've had in the past. Okay, motion to approve the resolution appropriating $30 million to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds to finance such appropriation. Senator?
So moved.
Second? Frank? All in favor? Okay, 6-0. Terrific. Okay, that's budget, refunding resolution. Okay, next on the agenda is to discuss and take action on bond appropriation and bond authorizations for the 2 projects that we've bonded instead of put in the operating budget. This is the Highland Farm improvements for $600,000 and the replacement of the Henley Elementary School roof for $550,000. Jennifer, any comments on these 2 resolutions?
No, just the difference in amount that you see is we've included 1.5% for cost of issuance.
Okay.
Small question. You know, it says here that the bond shall be in the denomination of $5,000 or a whole multiple thereof.
We always do 5,000.
Well, but a whole multiple of 5 would not get you to 609.
Because it's when we actually put together an entire deal, it will be a multiple of 5. So we won't issue just on this project.
Right.
The combination of all the projects will come out to an amount that's a
So
multiple.
if we had no more projects ever between now and when we bond, we would bond 605.
Right,
Okay,
We would just round down, have to pay 4,000 out of pocket
right.
okay.
or out of the general fund.
Okay, do we need a separate vote on both resolutions, or? Okay. So the first resolution is for Highland Farms improvements. Resolution appropriating $609,000 for the Highland Farms Improvements Project and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $609,000 to meet said appropriation. Can I have a motion on that? Jen, second. Paul, all in favor? Okay, 6-0. And the second is Resolution appropriating $558,250 for the Hindley Elementary School roof replacement project and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $558,250 to meet said appropriation. Motion to approve? Rob, second. Frank? All in favor? Okay, great. Excuse me. So that is bond appropriations and authorizations. We also need to discuss and take action on amendment to the appropriation of bond authorization for the town hall generator. That is not quite ready, so we're going to table that
Right.
until
At this
next
point,
month.
could we add the special appropriation for the $500,000 and take a vote on that so that it can move forward to Board of Selectmen? Because
Does that,
you discussed it as part of the budget, but you actually
Okay.
have to vote on a special
Mhm.
appropriation.
does that mean they'll then come back to us?
Nope, your part on that will be done.
Oh, so, all right, so, all right, we can do that. So how do you want the resolution to read? Just,
That we want to make a motion to approve a special appropriation of $500,000 to fund new sidewalks in the amount of $200,000.
okay, I'll do that. What was the, what was the $75,000 project we agreed to?
A rooftop unit at Homes.
Okay. Norton Heights, all right, so the sidewalks, the Norton Heights, what was that?
Norotan and Ledge Design
Design work, and then the
and
Fort
Short Lane.
Short Lane. Okay. So a resolution appropriating $500,000 for the following projects: sidewalk repair and renovation of $200,000, the Norton Heights Ledge Road traffic study of $175,000, the Short Lane improvements of $50,000, and the, what was the school?
Homes.
Homeschool gym roof,
Rooftop unit.
rooftop unit for $75,000. All of those total to $500,000, so we'd have a motion appropriating that from fund balance to go to the Board of Selectmen and then to the RTM. Mrs. Stevenson?
Just a small correction, but
Please.
it's important. You said for the sidewalks, your words were repair and maintenance. We have a separate line item for that. I think Jen intended the 200 grand to be for new sidewalk installations.
Thank you. All right, duly amended, I appreciate that, thank you. So this is for new sidewalk construction, again, $200,000. All of those items totaling $500,000, and this is a resolution to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that we appropriate that from fund balance to fund those projects, correct?
Correct.
Could I get a motion to approve that? Jim, second? Paul? All in favor? Okay. Does that do you for this, Jen? Is that
Yes.
fine? Okay. All right. So we're still tabling the appropriation and bond authorization for the town hall generator?
Yes.
Until next month? Okay. Okay. We need to discuss the proposed contract with the Darien Police Unit. We have a brief write-up that Kate and Lori and Jennifer have provided to us here. If you all have had a chance to read through it, we don't need to go through all of it, but this is a summary of the various elements of that contract. Is there anything you'd like to highlight in particular, Jen?
I think one highlight is that the general wage increases are less than the average negotiated and arbitrated settlements in the state.
Okay.
That's always the biggest point of contention, and I think we did well on that.
Great. The other thing that we talked about today was something I'm perennially concerned about, is anything that increases the town's future liability for retiree benefits in any way. So this could be pensions, health care, any type of those provisions, and there was none of that in this negotiated contract, correct?
Right, we made progress on medical contributions, and there is no change on pension.
Okay. So I am certainly okay with this and think it was a good job to get this negotiated. Do we vote to recommend this to the RTM, or
Yes.
sense of the board, just a vote on this? Okay.
Can I-
Any comments?
Can I ask just a
Sure.
couple questions? Hey, Jen, order back where the employee is allowed, they receive $100 in addition to payment for time worked. How often does that happen?
Not very often, we did check with the chief on that. More often than not, there's a volunteer for any shift, but this is just in the event that somebody is volunteered. They would be paid an additional $100 if they are required to stay. But it does not happen very often. That's one that we are going to keep an eye on and make sure that it doesn't begin increasing because there's a
Change the
payment
dynamic.
associated with it.
Yeah.
But we don't expect it to be a significant amount.
And The premiums for the increase in the death in the line of duty, what's the delta on that? Changed?
200,000, I believe.
No, in terms of cost to the town.
Oh, we self-insure on that.
Okay.
Okay, other comments on the police union contract settlement? Motion to approve? Rob, second, Frank? All in favor? Okay, 6-0, thanks. Okay. Item number 7, appointment of Blum Shapiro as the auditor for fiscal year 2019. How long have they been in place now?
I think this, if you appoint them for next year, it'll be the 5th year.
Okay. So Jen and I talked about this earlier today as well. They've done a good job in my view, I think in the view of the audit committee as well, and certainly in your view. So we voted last year to extend their appointment for another 2 years. So it would go to 5 years instead of 3. So we don't have to go through an exercise to consider whether they should be changed until next year. One of the things Jen and I talked about today was to maybe ping some of these other towns and see how they're thinking about this. Blum Shapiro's done a very nice job. It's not to say that we would never change them, but it does call into question the, in a sense, the arbitrariness of just simply every few years changing auditor. The sense of it being a best practice is that doing so brings in a fresh pair of eyes to take a fresh look at the town, and I think we've benefited from that in the past. At the same time, maybe next year when we pick this up, one of the questions we ought to consider is whether, as Jennifer has suggested, we should put it out to bid just to make sure that in terms of pricing and approach that all has been carefully considered, but that we wouldn't necessarily rule out reappointing them. And so we could consider that, but I wouldn't want to do that unless we'd had a sense of what other towns are doing and whether that's even an acceptable approach. And so we ought to take a look at that. But I think certainly for now, given the decision we made last year, that we would go ahead and reappoint them for our auditor for the coming year. Do you have
And
any questions about
If you
that?
did that, you might want to have the audit team change, even if it's the same organization.
And we did for this most recent audit, we had a partner change, and the entire team on site was new.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, so it has the same effect in a
Vanessa,
sense.
was you?
And is the Board of Ed on board with, I just want to make sure that, have they expressed anything that?
I
you
have
think
not,
is-
I have not heard
think-
any
Okay, that's enough.
displeasure.
That's enough,
Okay.
yeah.
Enough said. Other questions?
Just a quick one. Jen, there's no state laws in terms of how long you can
No,
use this?
not that I'm aware of.
I'm just thinking from a public standpoint, I think there's a PBOC which is every 5 years for large companies.
And you might
I
get the
think.
rating agencies to weigh in.
Yeah, so that's why over the course of this year, I want to get all those boxes checked to make sure that if we do embark on the process to take additional bids for the audit work, and we're going to include Blum Shapiro on that list, I want to make sure we've not violated any of those provisions, and so we will check that closely. Okay, but we'll appoint them again for next year, is my certain recommendation.
Did you need a motion, John?
I do, please.
Just a quick question on that. The auditors, do they tick and tie all the numbers in the OM as well?
They do not. They provide us a file, so at the back of that is all the audit tables and everything. They provide that to us for inclusion, but
In terms of like the numbers that pop up inside the body, they're not ticking and tying that?
no.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, motion to approve Blum Shapiro as the auditor for next year. Senator Rob, second. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a few transfers to go through today, 3 of them actually. Jennifer?
The first one is for the finance department. We utilized a temporary service after our payroll person retired, and it did extend longer than anticipated. So I'm requesting $20,719 to cover the balance of that. Overall, we spent about $41,000 on the temp. In the grand scheme of things, between what we didn't pay in salary and benefits, it was a little bit less than what we would have paid had our employee been here.
Okay. I'm okay with this. Other questions?
Well, just one question, why the move from contingency as opposed to that employee benefits account?
I could have taken it from employee benefits, but because it was a little bit of a mix of salary and employee benefits, I figured just move it all from contingency. We do have funds in the medical insurance line if you prefer to move it from there.
sake of simplicity, we'll leave the transfer as it is. Motion to approve. Rob, second. Jim, all in favor? Okay.
Yeah. Maybe, John, like, in the future, do you think we should try to, like, until the individual accounts run out, try to move them within
Seems right to me.
the same description?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's good
right.
practice in terms of, these are small amounts,
We
but
can do that.
Yep, I think that's a good recommendation. Next transfer?
Next one is to transfer $7,620 from contingency into our software maintenance and support for implementation of Munis's Tyler Content Manager, which is a digital archiving system, and will pull us into about the beginning of the 21st century on some of our records and employee access. And I think it'll be very efficient for departments, employees, and the finance department.
Okay, comments or questions? I'm okay with this. These are the kinds of investments you have to make regularly. Motion to approve. Rob, second. Senator? All in favor? Okay. And the final one.
This is a request to move $142,526 from the Board of Finance reserve in the capital fund to the Goodwives sediment dredging account. The original project was to be funded $77,000 by the town and $550,000 from the state through a STEEP grant. When we went to apply for the reimbursement, we had overspent specifically in the dam repair category, primarily because of a change in deep regulations and requirements that increased our costs. But the grant didn't get reallocated. So we requested reimbursement. They gave us some additional reimbursement for the expenses that went over on the dam repair, but they did not reimburse all of our costs. So all told, the project has a deficit of $142,000. We finished the project within budget, but funding-wise, it has a deficit of that $142,000. $8,500 of it is on the town-funded portion. We budgeted $77,000, we expended $110,000, and we had a reimbursement of $25,000 from the Friends of Florence Pond. And the other $133,000 is split, $132,000 for the dam repair and $1,000 for a total clean test.
Where does this leave the Board of Finance contingency?
We have,
this is coming out of the capital.
yes, the capital
Contingency, right?
contingency. So this would, right now, the balance is, after this, it would be $735,000 in the capital contingency.
And we didn't budget any contributions to the contingency this year, did we?
We did not.
These monies have already been paid, right?
They have been. On the back side of that transfer request, there's some additional explanation that Kate provided to the Board of Selectmen. Timing of this project and this grant didn't work well. We had all new staff members, or new positions, myself, Ed, and Kate. The original grant award ran out December 31st, 2015, and none of us knew that because that information hadn't been shared, it wasn't available. So one thing that Kate and I have talked about is, at least for our larger grants that require better tracking, having a shared spreadsheet or shared tracking system so that if there is a change in staff, the knowledge of the grant doesn't go with them.
Okay. So this feels like something that we could have gotten had it been managed better.
I think if we had known, we could have, for one thing, we could have approached the state before the original grant award ran out
This is
and
too-
asked them to reallocate. We actually had to get special legislation to extend the grant awards because the majority of the work had not even been completed by December 31st of 2015. So they did extend the grant award. But none of us knew enough about this grant. Had we known, we, as Kate says in her memo, maybe we wouldn't have even proceeded with the project. I think we would have handled it differently if we had more knowledge.
Okay.
Because the original award was more than what actually got spent.
Right, we didn't
Yeah.
overspend.
Yeah.
It's just the way it was allocated.
Before we vote on this, is there Are there any other sort of similar projects that are potentially funded by these grants that we ought to take a look at or ponder? And I just ask that in the spirit of, sounds like there's not much we can do about this, but there might be something we could do about others. And I just wonder whether this event suggests that we do like we did with the analysis of cash deficits in some of those projects, get something pulled together where it looks like there's grant funding attached to some of these projects, and just ask the question, are we paying attention to that stuff? For each one, have we delineated things like deadlines and other stuff like that, so we don't get into a mistake like that, and there's a systematized way for tracking it?
Yeah, that's what Kate and I do want to work on. There's nothing that came to her mind or my mind as ones that are lingering out there, but of course, we wouldn't have picked up on this one beforehand either. The majority of the large grants are going through Ed. He has a very good system for his own tracking, but what my concern is if Ed has all that information, we need it shared among more than one person.
Geez, and I would really encourage that. There's another, roughly a policy issue. Jen, I think you may have just arrived about that time that we had the discussion.
Yeah, I've been here. I think,
And
3
I'm
weeks.
remembering that couple of meetings we had. And just this general sense that we were being asked to do something and we really didn't have all the facts. It was just, we need to accelerate this to get the DEEP grant process moving, and yet the answers we wanted weren't in hand. It wasn't the deliberate process we should expect. We would want to avoid that.
I think in general, we don't get a lot of grants, but when we do get them, we need them to be well managed. It's decentralized into the departments. They're responsible for their own grants. Some of them are better at it than others. So Kate and I can also come up with a tool to assist the departments in managing their grants. You know, we're not large enough to warrant having a grants coordinator, but we do have some significant grants that do need that extra assistance.
Is this Board of Finance contingency the best way to fund this? And I just ask that in the spirit of whether there's controversy with this, that it really should be an appropriation that goes to the RTM instead of this contingency.
You know, the way I viewed it was that funds had already been appropriated, town funds had already been appropriated for this purpose.
This was just a revenue shortfall.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm okay with this. Any other questions?
We don't have anything else coming down the line that we would need to dip into our capital contingency account.
The only thing would be depending on timing with Oxbridge, the school project, if they need some, we did $10,000 for their survey, that was a small
Right.
nominal amount, but I haven't heard, but if there's any concern on timing between going through the process of getting an appropriation and bond authorization versus if they need an appropriation for some part of their project, I could see that as a potential.
I don't think it would rise to up to
Yeah.
$700,000. I mean, it could be $100,000 or $200,000,
And
but
we
not,
can do an
nothing like
intention to
that.
bond at the same time, so
Right.
though we would draw from the contingency once we did.
We could replace it. It would be a
authorization,
loan.
It would go back.
Okay.
Can I just, not to steal Jill's thunder, but the cafeteria committee is kind of wrapping up, and it looks like, I'll just use kind of round numbers, we're about $40,000 left over of the contingency and other things that kind of came in under, primarily, I think the largest of which was a tie-in. Those dollars, because we're already bonded, they're already appropriated, so I think, will they go back into this fund?
No, but they can be, through your action, they can be moved to another project that is authorized for bonding. So say that when we do the amendment for the town hall generator, Ed says, I need $40,000. We can do the appropriation and bond authorization, but we wouldn't have to borrow that because we could transfer it from the cafeteria to the
But
town
that
hall
couldn't go
generator.
back into this capital
No, because
account?
they're bond dollars. So they have to be used on a project that is authorized.
But even though
for
we
bonding.
did use some,
But we've reimbursed ourselves, because we bonded the full amount of the project. So what we fronted from the general fund cash-wise has been repaid with this bond issue that we
Got
just
it.
did.
Okay. Other questions on this? Motion to approve. Frank, second. Jim? All in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, financial report.
Pretty standard. The property tax numbers that you see are through February, just because of the timing of this report, we didn't have March reconciled and posted. But on page 5 of the report, the question came up last month of what have we levied versus what have we collected, what's still floating out there that we could collect. So we budgeted 137.2 roughly. The current levy is at 138,223,000. We've collected 136.7, which leaves almost 1.5 million uncollected. So our versus budget, we have 448,000 remaining to attain our budget number, but there's 1.4 million that is collectible.
Is that unusual?
There is a portion of it because of the senior tax relief program, the deferrals. There is a portion of it that just isn't collectible, even though
Okay.
it's levied. But I think this is pretty much in line with this time of year.
Okay.
The number later on is just a little bit different on the 136,
What page are you on?
5.
Oh, so
It's
which number compared to what?
136,741 versus 136,729.
I pulled them from 2 different reports,
Okay.
so clearly we have an item to reconcile.
Hey, Jen, what causes the current levy as opposed to the budget? What's that little discrepancy of $1.1 million?
So the budget is our estimate, and it's reduced by the budgeted collection. So it's the number that we need to make the budget work, to balance the budget.
So you just
And
throw the
our-
number out there and,
Right, and
This is
then
the
our
real
budgeted
number.
collection
Right.
rate reduces the mill rate,
okay.
and so the levy will be different. And then throughout the year, there's additions and reductions to the grand list.
Very good. Anything else on the financial report for this month?
I just wanted to call your attention to the last page, actually pages 10 and 11. These now reflect no cash deficits because of closing on our bond dollars on April 2nd.
So fantastic. This,
Can I ask you a question on one of those pages? The DHS shed,
The storage facility.
the storage facility.
Don't say
It doesn't
shed.
strike me
Yeah,
as
no shed.
something that would be very hard to do, so why hasn't that money been spent, or what's the thought on that?
I have not had any conversations with the Board of Ed about that. I do know that we put the appropriation in place a couple of years ago. It was requested in the budget, we pulled it out of the budget, and when we were getting ready to bond, I asked if they had any anticipation of seeing that money spent soon, and they did not. That's the extent of information I have.
I think, I spoke to Jen, I think there were some questions. I think the Board of Ed has the Facilities Committee, correct me if I'm wrong, that is now actively looking at it. I think there was some questions from the Board of Ed about whether or not, because we did bond it, whether they could go out and hire an architect to start working on it. Jen sort of got me some answers, and we relayed to the Board of Ed that they actually have the ability, that money's already sort of appropriated there, so they, because it's not bonded, they can go out and do it. So I think it's now in their Facilities Committee being reviewed.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it had been abandoned, basically. Okay.
good question. Anyway, thank you for doing that. That's, it's great that those deficits have been cleared and bonded as opposed to not, which is what we had before. Very good. Okay, approval of minutes.
Hey, John, sorry, can I just ask one
Please.
last question on financials? Hey, Jen, on page 9, on the revenues, on the parking pay stations, so we're at 63%, at 205,000 remaining. Is that to June, or is that to the end of the year?
The percent collected, that's just through March.
Through March, I'm saying, but the financial year is running out June 30th, right? Or
Yes.
We think we're gonna, do we just,
I'll take a look at that.
Yeah,
I
it
should say,
just feels
actually,
light.
there is a 1-month lag because the majority of those are paid through credit card.
okay.
So I'll take a look at those.
Yeah,
and
it just
give you an
feels
update
light.
And make sure that we don't have more than a 1-month lag on that.
Okay,
Well, if it's a 1-month lag, it's kind of right on target.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little light, but not terribly so. Okay. Other questions on the financial report? Okay. Approval of minutes. We've got minutes for January 15th, which we couldn't approve because I didn't think we had quorum to get those minutes approved.
John, just in
Yes,
the
sir.
first instance on January 15th, I think the main modifications affected a paragraph beginning page 2, the first paragraph, which we, may I say, we rebuilt. Jen, I think, has prepared this revised language, and it's more reflective of some comments I made. I think that
At the
was
top of page 2, is this to your satisfaction now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Which ones did I rewrite? Are these one of those? The March 5th?
March 5th.
Okay. All
That
right.
was January 15th.
Yeah, this is January 15th. Any other questions on the January 15th minutes? Okay, so everybody can vote on these except Frank, who was not there that day. Motion to approve the January 15th minutes. Rob, Senator, seconds that. All in favor? Okay, we'll do 5 to 0 to 1 with Frank abstaining. Okay, the March 5th minutes, Diana was not there, so Jen sent me to these minutes to me. So these actually reflect all my edits. I rewrote what they'd sent. So I think they're in good shape, but you guys got to tell me.
One paragraph at the end that was potentially incendiary.
Incendiary.
But I recommend we keep it
Okay, let's see that. Where is it? On the page 1?
on page 1, yeah.
Page 1, last paragraph. Mr. McLaughlin said one of the budget drivers is changes in the number of required sections. He asked about the BOE's 5-year forecast in this regard, suggesting that increases probably could be addressed by redistricting. Potentially controversial. Okay. Motion to approve the March 5th minutes. Rob, second. Frank? And everybody could vote except Diana, she's not here, so all in favor? Great, thank you. Okay, any special assignments or committee reports? Audit, cafeteria? I guess the only one I have is the Oxbridge Building Committee. They are meeting tomorrow morning at 7:30. And I believe we have architecture proposals, do we have proposals for that meeting, or do we?
Yes, I think they
That's right.
were received earlier this
All
week.
right, we had proposals to consider in that meeting, so kudos to Duke and Kip, who are doing a great job co-chairing that effort, and it's moving along with alacrity. So, quite good. Any other committee assignments or reports to bring up?
I mentioned the cafeteria is
Yeah, please.
almost done.
Great.
I think only one meeting left.
Have a quarterly pension board meeting at the end of this month.
Okay, terrific. That's coming. Great. The only thing on chairman's report is a switch in the May meeting date, which Francis has brought up.
Really,
And so
Mr.
we
Chair?
see if we could possibly switch that date to accommodate
Let's take a look.
Mr. Huck. So right now, that meeting is set for Tuesday, May 21st. Did you have a suggestion, Francis?
14?
Okay, we move that meeting to the 14th of May.
Okay. 24, yeah.
That works for me. Would there be any objections to moving the May 21st to May
John, just, I'm
14th?
sorry, the meeting was,
The 21st.
Yeah, the
21st,
currently
yes, I
scheduled for the
have that.
21st, and the proposal
we
is to
would
move
move it
that
to
to
the
the 14th.
14th.
Yes. Is that all right with everybody?
we'll manage it.
You'll manage it. All right. So we will move
Okay,
the
thank you.
Board of Finance meeting on the 21st of May to the 14th of May. All right. I don't have anything for the chairman's report today. Does anyone else have anything else for the good of the order? I think we're done. Motion to adjourn, please. Rob, second. Jim? We're adjourned, 8:35 PM.